star system was dark. Like a still-breathing corpse lost among forgotten constellations, this world had once been a jewel, brimming with promise. Now, it was nothing more than a festering wound on the face of the Imperium. It had been cursed, abandoned, left to rot under the endless weight of its own sins. But the Imperium's law was unforgiving, even in death. The Astra Militarum was sent, those who had known nothing but the taste of death and dust. They were here to conquer a world that had already been conquered long ago, one that had lost its soul but would pay for its sins in blood. The silence was palpable, but beneath it, something stirred, something ancient, not just a death trap, but a warning. As the dropships descended into the thick, acrid air, the men of the Astra Militarum could feel it. This was no ordinary battlefield. It was a place steeped in blood and misery, but more than that, it was a place of nightmares, and there would be no mercy. If you want to explore the hell that awaits them, if you dare enter the cursed heart of this forsaken world, subscribe, like, and share. Let's descend into the darkness together. The atmosphere in the shuttle was thick with the scent of burning ozone, the stench of machinery long past its prime. Beneath the dull hum of the engines, the soldiers of the Astra Militarum sat in uneasy silence, eyes fixed on the view screen before them. Below, the cursed planet loomed, a jagged silhouette against the inky expanse of space. Once a beacon of industry, a symbol of imperial might, it now seemed little more than a shadow of its former self. A dying world, its very air seemingly saturated with the weight of forgotten sins. The emptiness outside the shuttle's hull matched the emptiness in the hearts of those on board. As the shuttle began its descent, the squad leader, Sergeant Horace, offered no words of reassurance. He had none to give. His eyes were locked on the horizon below, where the planet's desolation stretched out in all directions, blackened landscapes broken only by the twisted remains of crumbling spires and ruins. He had been to hell before, fought in battles where the ground itself seemed to devour the dead. But this was different. The planet had been lost to the Imperium for centuries. Its name, forgotten in the annals of Imperial history, had been revived only in whispers. A place where the Emperor's light had once shone bright, now tainted by heresy, the price of defiance paid in blood. The details of its downfall were scattered across corrupted data slates, buried beneath layers of bureaucratic negligence. No one spoke of it openly. No one wanted to remember. Yet here they were, the Astra Militarum, the Emperor's chosen soldiers, sent to cleanse this planet, to bring it back into the fold, or die trying. The descent was agonizingly slow. The shuttle's hull rattled as it cut through the thickening atmosphere, the metal groaning under the pressure. Each vibration seemed to sink deeper into the bones of the soldiers, tightening their grips on their rifles, the cold weight of dread settling over them. Outside, the planet seemed to fight back. The wind kicked up, violent gusts swirling in chaotic patterns. The dark clouds that surrounded them grew darker still, swirling like a vortex. For all its defiance, the planet was dying, slowly suffocating beneath its own weight. A sharp crackle over the Vox grill broke the tension. Sergeant Horace's voice, gruff and commanding, filtered through the static. "Brace yourselves. We're landing soon." The men and women of the Imperial Guard exchanged nervous glances, some muttering quiet prayers to the Emperor, others clutching the crosses of their faith. They all knew what awaited them below. Their orders were simple: secure the landing zone, establish a perimeter, and wait for reinforcements. The rest of the world, the rest of the planet, could wait. But the silence in the shuttle was deafening. Even the soldiers seemed to feel it, the oppressive weight of a world long forgotten pressing in on them. It wasn't just the gravity of the planet that felt unnatural. It was something deeper, something older. This was not just a battlefield. It was a death trap, and they were its next victims. As the shuttle broke through the final layers of atmosphere, the first jagged spires of the ruined city became visible. A sea of broken metal and stone scattered across the barren land like the remnants of some ancient battle. The Emperor had sent them here to bring hope, to bring justice, but all they could see was desolation. There were no banners to raise, no statues of glory, only ruin. The shuttle's landing gear groaned as it touched down, the whine of hydraulics joining the chorus of mechanical suffering. For a moment, the silence of the planet seemed to mock them, as if the world itself was waiting to see if they would dare to step onto its soil, to challenge whatever had been left behind. But there was no time for hesitation. They had come to cleanse, and if they were to die, they would die serving the Emperor, as all good soldiers did. The rear hatch of the shuttle hissed open with a violent rush of air, releasing a cloud of steam. Sergeant Horace led the way, his boots crunching against the cracked earth as he stepped onto the planet's surface. Behind him, the soldiers followed, each one bracing themselves for the unknown. The ground beneath their feet felt unnatural, like it had never known the touch of living flesh. It was cold, dry, and cracked, as though the life had been drained from it long ago. A dust storm picked up as they advanced, swirling in tight circles around their boots, the air thick with the scent of burnt metal and old, stagnant oil. The soldiers' movements felt sluggish, as if the very atmosphere was fighting them. The world seemed alive with some malevolent force, pressing down on them from all sides. The city ruins rose before them, tall, broken structures, their skeletal remains looming like forgotten monuments to something once glorious. But now, they were no more than grave markers, signs of the planet's slow death. The squad moved in formation, weapons raised, scanning the desolation for any signs of life. But there was nothing, not a single sound, not a whisper of movement, just the howling wind and the distant echoing groan of the ruins. Sergeant Horace motioned for them to stop, his voice cutting through the static of their comms. "Stay alert. The enemy isn't just what you can see." The soldiers nodded, their faces grim, their eyes searching the empty horizon. They had been through countless battles, fought through the worst the galaxy could throw at them, but none of them had ever felt a presence like this. There was something wrong with this place, something that gnawed at their minds, just beyond their reach. For a moment, the only sound was the wind, but then, there it was, a faint hum. It was distant, almost imperceptible, but it was there, like the thrum of some ancient engine. The soldiers stopped, their eyes darting to the ruins around them. What was it? A relic of the past? Or something worse? "Keep moving," Sergeant Horace barked, his voice sharp, snapping the men from their reverie. "The Emperor's light will guide us." But deep down, they all knew the truth. There was no light here. Not anymore. The squad pressed on, their footsteps heavy, their breath visible in the cold air. As they moved deeper into the ruins, the vastness of the city became more apparent. Towering spires of blackened stone, twisted and cracked by the ravages of time and war, loomed overhead, casting long shadows across the desolate streets. Once, this city had been alive with the pulse of commerce, the hum of imperial industry. Now, it was a graveyard, silent, still, and waiting. The deeper they ventured, the more unsettling the scene became. Broken statues, their faces weathered and eroded, stood like sentinels to a lost age. The wind howled between the empty streets, carrying with it the faint, bitter taste of decay. The soldiers' boots crunched over shards of shattered glass, fragments of once pristine buildings, now reduced to rubble. The oppressive silence was broken only by the occasional clatter of metal or the distant, unnerving creaks of what remained of the city's framework. It felt as though the world itself was holding its breath, watching, waiting for something, anything, to happen. "Eyes up," Sergeant Horace called, his voice stern. "Stay alert. We don't know what's out here." The soldiers nodded, their hands tightening around their weapons. Each one of them was acutely aware of the danger that surrounded them, even if they couldn't quite put a name to it. Something was wrong. They could feel it in the pit of their stomachs, an unease that gnawed at them with every step they took. It was the kind of feeling you got when you were being watched by something unseen, something that hungered for you. They were intruders on this planet, and it didn't want them here. As they rounded a corner, a strange object caught the eye of Corporal Titus. A blackened obelisk stood in the center of the street, its surface covered in intricate, unfamiliar symbols. It was nothing like anything the soldiers had seen before, its shape too perfect, too unnatural. Titus approached cautiously, his boots scraping against the debris strewn across the ground. His fingers brushed against the surface of the obelisk, and the moment he touched it, a sharp, electric jolt shot through him, making him stumble backward. "Corporal!" shouted Sergeant Horace, rushing forward. "Are you all right?" Titus staggered to his feet, his face pale. I don't know what it was, Sergeant. It's like the thing. It reacted to me." Horace narrowed his eyes. The obelisk didn't belong here. It was out of place, too precise for the chaotic surroundings. But something in the back of his mind told him it was no mere relic. It was alive, or at least it had been, once. The world around them was starting to feel less like a forgotten ruin, and more like something that had been purposefully left behind. "Stay away from it," Horace ordered. "We don't know what it could be, but I'm not taking any chances." They continued forward, though the strange object lingered in the back of Horace's mind. There was something unsettling about the way it seemed to watch them as they moved past, like an eye that refused to blink. The squad reached what appeared to be the remnants of an old manufactorum, its towering structures almost intact despite the passage of time. Inside, the faint hum of dormant machinery lingered, a ghost of the factory's former life. The soldiers entered cautiously, weapons at the ready, scanning for any signs of movement. "What's this place?" Private Malik whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why does it feel wrong?" "It's a manufactorum," Sergeant Horace said. "Once, it was the beating heart of this city. Now it's just another tomb." They moved deeper into the structure, past rusted conveyor belts and shattered assembly lines, each corner filled with the faint scent of oil and decay. The only light came from the dim glow of their flashlights, cutting through the darkness like beams of hope in a long-forgotten abyss. As they reached what appeared to be the heart of the manufactorum, the ground beneath their feet suddenly trembled. The rumble was faint at first, but it grew louder, more intense, until the very walls of the building seemed to shake with the force. The soldiers halted, looking around in confusion, their hearts racing. "What the hell is that?" Malik asked, his voice tight with fear. Before Horus could respond, the ground shook violently, and a loud, deafening screech echoed through the structure. It was as if the planet itself had awakened, groaning, complaining, as though it was alive. The sound seemed to come from all directions, vibrating through the metal of the building, rattling their bones. "Everyone, get down!" Horus shouted, pushing his men to the ground as the building's support beams groaned under the pressure. Dust and debris rained down from above, the structure threatening to collapse around them. The screeching sound intensified, reaching a fever pitch, and then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. A profound, oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of their ragged breaths. "What the hell was that?" Titus gasped, looking around. "I don't know," Horus replied, his voice strained. "But whatever it was, it doesn't want us here." The soldiers scrambled to their feet, their eyes darting around the dimly lit manufactorum, alert for any sign of movement. But the silence hung heavy, suffocating them. They had ventured too deep. Something in this cursed city was aware of their presence, and it was not pleased. "Move out," Horus ordered. "We need to find a place to set up a perimeter. Keep your eyes open." As they moved out of the manufactorum, the oppressive weight of the silence followed them. But there was something else now, a strange, almost palpable sense of being watched. The planet itself seemed to be pressing in on them, and Horus could feel it in his gut. It wasn't just the enemy that they had to worry about. It was the very world itself. The cursed planet had begun to reveal its true nature. The squad continued to push forward, their steps now deliberate, their senses on high alert. Each soldier's breath felt heavier than before, as though the very air they inhaled had turned thick with some unseen presence. They had moved past the remnants of the manufactorum, but the eerie stillness of the world around them hadn't eased. It clung to their minds, whispering doubts, filling their thoughts with the taste of impending doom. The buildings around them seemed to close in, their skeletal remains towering over the soldiers like silent giants, casting long shadows that flickered strangely in the harsh light of their torches. The broken streets stretched on endlessly, winding through the ruins like a labyrinth of death. Every corner turned seemed to reveal more decay. Shattered windows, empty doorways, abandoned vehicles, and machinery slowly corroding into nothingness. There was no sign of life. But then a low growl broke the silence. It came from deep within one of the nearby buildings, an ancient structure that had been untouched by the years of decay. The noise was deep and guttural, reverberating through the walls like a warning. The soldiers stopped dead in their tracks, their fingers tightening on their weapons. Sergeant Horus raised a hand, signaling for them to remain still. The growl came again, louder this time. It was the unmistakable sound of something alive, something that hadn't forgotten how to hunt. Horus motioned for two of the men, Corporal Titus and Private Malik, to move forward. The others followed in a tight formation, eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. The low growl grew louder with each passing step, echoing off the walls of the ruined city. The squad reached the doorway of the building, its once proud archway now crumbling, with jagged shards of stone littering the ground. Horus leaned against the wall, signaling for the others to spread out. Their weapons were ready, their hearts pounding in their chests. Every sense was screaming that danger was near, but they couldn't see it. They could only hear it. And then, without warning, the growling stopped. The world fell silent again, as if the very air had stopped moving. The tension in the squad was palpable, each soldier standing motionless, their eyes darting in every direction, scanning for the source of the threat. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted, like something massive was moving beneath the surface. The soldiers staggered, their boots slipping in the loose rubble as they regained their balance. A sharp, screeching sound filled the air, as if metal was tearing against metal. It echoed through the building, rattling their bones. From the darkened interior of the building, something large and fast shot out, a blur of motion. It was a creature, twisted and malformed, a hideous amalgamation of flesh and metal. Its skin was mottled with patches of rust and decay, like it had been living in the shadows for centuries. Eyes that glowed a sickly green locked onto the soldiers as it charged forward, its claws scraping against the stone floor. The squad reacted instantly, their weapons firing in unison, sending bursts of laser fire into the creature's body. It howled in pain, stumbling back, but it didn't fall. The squad's firepower seemed to have little effect, as if the creature was made of something more than just flesh. It was an abomination, born of the planet's curse, perhaps, or a leftover from a forgotten age. "Focus fire," Horus shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. "Aim for the head." But it wasn't enough. The creature retaliated with savage fury, charging straight at Private Malik. He had no time to react, no time to dodge, as the creature's claws raked across his chest, tearing through his armor like it was paper. Malik screamed, falling to the ground in a heap, his body convulsing as blood poured from his wounds. "Malik!" Titus shouted, but it was too late. The creature spun, raising one of its grotesque limbs to strike again. Horus acted on instinct, grabbing a nearby frag grenade from his belt and hurling it at the creature. It detonated with a deafening explosion, sending the abomination flying backwards. The creature screeched, but it was still alive, struggling to rise, its body writhing as if the very wounds they had inflicted were healing before their eyes. "Move! Now!" Horus bellowed, pulling the soldiers away from the advancing creature. The squad retreated quickly, firing as they moved, but it was clear that the creature was not going to let them leave without a fight. Its massive form filled the doorway, blocking their escape. Each time the squad fired, the creature seemed to grow stronger, as if the very presence of the soldiers was feeding it. Horus glanced back, his mind racing. They were trapped. They couldn't outrun it, and they couldn't kill it. Not like this. "Fall back," he ordered, his voice filled with urgency. "Get to the shuttle, now." The soldiers scrambled, retreating as best they could, but it was clear they weren't going to make it. The creature was too fast, too relentless. It was like it was waiting for them to slip, to make a mistake. Then, from the corner of his eye, Horus spotted something, an old, crumbling staircase leading up to the higher levels of the building. Without thinking, he grabbed Titus by the arm, dragging him toward it. "Up there!" Horus yelled. The rest of the squad followed, scrambling up the stairs in a chaotic, desperate rush. Behind them, the creature's growls grew louder as it continued its pursuit. Horus glanced back as they reached the top, the creature now almost at their heels. And then, as if the planet itself had answered their cries, the building shuddered violently. Once again, the walls cracked and the ceiling above them gave way, sending dust and debris raining down. The creature roared in fury, but it was too late. The entire structure collapsed on itself, burying the abomination in the rubble. The survivors, however, were left suspended in the dark, choking dust, their lives spared. For now. The only sound that remained was the distant howl of the wind outside, and the faint echo of the creature's final scream, swallowed by the earth. The silence that followed the collapse was suffocating. The heavy dust settled in thick clouds around them, choking the air, making it hard to breathe. For a long moment, there was no sound save for the rasping breaths of the survivors, their faces smeared with dirt and ash. They remained frozen in place, the weight of what had just transpired heavy on their shoulders. The world outside seemed to have vanished, consumed by the collapse that had nearly ended their lives. Horus was the first to break the stillness. His voice, hoarse but firm, echoed through the debris. "Is everyone still with me?" A muffled murmur of agreement followed, but the sound was weak, tinged with the shock and exhaustion that had taken hold of the squad. The creature, whatever it had been, had almost claimed them all. Only the collapse of the building had spared them, and even now they could hear the faint creaks of shifting debris above them. Horus wiped the dust from his face and motioned for the squad to rise. His mind raced, but the overwhelming sense of danger had not subsided. The creature they had encountered was only the beginning. This planet was no mere shell of a forgotten world. It was something far worse, a living nightmare waiting to swallow them whole. "Move," he ordered sharply. "We're not safe here. We need to find cover and regroup." They stumbled forward, disoriented but driven by the unyielding instinct to survive. Horus's mind kept returning to the thing they had seen. It had been too powerful, too relentless. It wasn't just some wild creature. It was a manifestation of the planet itself, a twisted reflection of the corruption that had taken root here. As they made their way through the wreckage, they reached the far side of the building. The ground was uneven, cracked open by the violent shaking of the earth. Every step felt like it could be their last, as if the very surface beneath them was unstable, ready to collapse once again. Horus's eyes scanned the area for any signs of life, any hint of another threat. But for now, the area seemed eerily quiet. "Sergeant," Private Titus called, his voice strained but insistent. "What? What was that thing? I've never seen anything like it." Horus didn't have an answer. He had no idea what it was either. Whatever it was, it had been born of something twisted, something dark. This was no ordinary world, and they were no longer just soldiers of the Imperium. They were intruders in a place where reality had long since bent and broken. "I don't know," Horus replied gruffly, "but I'm sure as hell not sticking around to find out. We need to keep moving." They continued to push forward, the oppressive atmosphere closing in around them. The deeper they ventured, the more the world seemed to close off. The structures around them, once towering monuments to industry and imperial power, now looked like nothing more than ruins, decaying tombs filled with the echoes of the past. It felt as if the planet was alive, that it was holding its breath, waiting for the soldiers to fall into its grasp. The distant howl of wind carried across the city, but there was something more to it now. A subtle vibration beneath the ground, like the planet itself was shifting, stirring from an ancient slumber. The air felt thicker, heavier, and the soldiers began to feel it more deeply. Something was wrong, not just with the city, but with the very world beneath their feet. As they made their way through a narrow passageway between two crumbled buildings, they heard it again, the sound of movement. But this time, it wasn't a growl or the distant screech of the creature from before. It was a whisper, a low, almost imperceptible murmur that seemed to vibrate in the air, pulling at the edges of their sanity. "Did anyone else hear that?" Corporal Titus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The squad paused, straining to listen. The whisper was still there, echoing faintly. It was unintelligible, but it was unmistakable. It wasn't a voice, they all knew that, but something more ancient, something that belonged to this world, not to them. "It's the planet," Horus muttered under his breath. "It's calling to us." He had no proof of it, no concrete understanding of what was happening, but he could feel it deep in his bones. The planet was alive, not in the way that any normal world might be. This was a place touched by the warp, where the lines between reality and nightmare blurred into something darker, more insidious. They moved faster now, urgency fueling their steps. The air was growing colder, and the shadows between the crumbling buildings seemed to deepen, stretching out toward them like claws, eager to drag them into the earth. The whispers followed them, now louder, more distinct. A chorus of voices speaking in a language they couldn't understand. But that felt all too familiar. It was as if the very walls of the city, the ground beneath their feet, were alive with the memories of those who had once lived here. They rounded another corner, and the squad froze. There, in the center of the street, was a massive structure. It looked like a cathedral, its once great doors shattered and twisted, a jagged ruin that stretched high into the sky. Its surface was covered in strange symbols, inscriptions that seemed to pulse with a faint light. The air around it vibrated, with energy, a power that hummed deep in their skulls, sending chills down their spines. "This is it," Horus breathed, his voice filled with awe and dread. "This is what we came for." It wasn't just a cathedral. It was the heart of this world, the epicenter of whatever curse had turned this planet into a death trap. They had found it, the source of the whispers, the heart of the planet's darkness. But as they stepped closer, the ground beneath them trembled once again. The city seemed to come alive, the earth shifting, groaning in protest. The cathedral's doors began to open, slowly, as if welcoming them. And from within, the whispering grew louder, more insistent. It was beckoning them in. "Stay sharp," Horus warned, his hand on his weapon. "Something's inside, and it's not going to let us leave." The squad moved forward, their steps heavy with the weight of what was to come. They had ventured too far to turn back now. The heart of the curse awaited them, and there was no turning back. The doors of the cathedral groaned as they slowly swung open, revealing an interior bathed in a strange, ethereal light. The air within was thick, carrying with it a musty, ancient scent, like the smell of old books and decaying wood. The light flickered in the vast hall, cast from an unseen source above, and its unnatural glow made the cathedral feel as though it were suspended in time, caught between the past and something darker. The squad hesitated at the threshold, their eyes scanning the cavernous interior. It was vast, more a tomb than a place of worship. The floors were cracked, the walls covered in layers of dust and grime, yet there was something about the place that made it feel alive, almost sentient. The air was still, as though it held its breath, waiting for something to happen. "Eyes open," Sergeant Horace muttered, his voice low. "This is where it all ends." The soldiers stepped inside, their boots echoing loudly on the cold stone floor. They moved cautiously, weapons raised, every sense alert for any sign of danger. The walls were lined with faded murals, their colors long since faded, but the images were still recognizable, a celebration of a time when this place had been filled with the light of the Emperor. Battles were depicted on the walls, victories and sacrifices, but all of it seemed so distant now. The once glorious history was now little more than faded images on crumbling stone. As they advanced further, the whispering grew louder. It seemed to come from every corner, every crevice of the cathedral. It was not one voice, but many, layered upon each other, murmuring in a language they could not understand. The words were lost in the shifting air, like a haunting lullaby, comforting, yet unsettling. The sound reverberated through the walls, filling the room with an almost tangible presence. Private Malik shifted nervously, glancing around. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It feels like we're not alone here." "We're not," Horace replied grimly. "This place was never just a cathedral. It was a forge, a place of forbidden rituals. Whatever happened here, whatever cursed this world, it began within these walls." The whispers seemed to intensify at his words, as if the very walls of the cathedral were reacting to the mention of its dark past. The ground beneath their feet trembled, a low rumble that reverberated through the building. It was as though the cathedral itself was alive, responding to the intrusion of the Imperial soldiers. The lights flickered again, and for a brief moment, the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, creeping toward them like dark tendrils. "Keep moving," Horace urged. "We're close. Whatever is left of this place, it's here." They made their way deeper into the cathedral, past rows of broken pews and shattered stained glass windows, their once vibrant colors now mere ghosts of their former glory. As they reached the center of the room, they found what they had been searching for: a massive altar, raised high above the floor, its surface etched with more strange symbols, the air around it thick with an unnatural energy. It was here, in this sacred space, that the heart of the curse had been sealed. An ancient relic, perhaps, or a power too terrible for the Imperium to comprehend. Horace's eyes narrowed as he approached the altar, his mind racing with the implications. What had been performed here? What kind of ritual had bound the planet in such suffering? "Sergeant," Corporal Titus said, his voice tight with fear. "Look." Horace turned to see Titus pointing to the base of the altar. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a collection of old, discarded artifacts, bits of broken machinery, old relics, scraps of data slates. But as they moved closer, the true horror became apparent. The altar was not just a symbol of worship, it was a prison. A thick, pulsating energy field surrounded a dark, twisted shape, one that seemed to move and shift in the shadows, like something alive. It was as if the relic itself had been contained within the altar, held in place by some unnatural force. The very air around it seemed to throb with power, the whispering voices growing louder still, now filling their ears like an overwhelming tide of despair. "I don't like this," Titus muttered, his eyes wide with fear. "What is it?" "It's a prison," Horus replied, his voice low. "Whatever force is holding it here, it's not of this world. It's something older, something darker." The soldiers gathered around the altar, their weapons still raised, but no one dared to get too close. The very air seemed to warn them back, a subtle pressure building in their chests, as if the presence within the altar was aware of their arrival. Horus took a cautious step forward, studying the symbols that adorned the altar's surface. They were similar to those they had seen scattered throughout the city, ancient, forgotten, filled with dark power. But this was something else entirely. This was a gateway, a wound in the fabric of reality left open for too long. "Something happened here," Horus murmured. "A great failure, and the planet, the entire system, is paying the price." Private Malik swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "What? What was it? A weapon? A machine?" "I don't know," Horus said, shaking his head. "But it's tied to the planet's curse. That much is clear." A chill ran down his spine as he reached out to touch the altar, the symbols beneath his fingers thrumming with energy. He could feel it, like the hum of a distant storm, gathering strength. And then, just as quickly, a voice broke through the chaos. Not from the altar, but from somewhere else, deep within the bowels of the cathedral. It was a low, guttural voice, almost drowned out by the whispers, but still unmistakable. It was human, or at least it had once been. "You should not have come." The voice echoed through the walls, bouncing off the stone like a curse. It was followed by a strange, mechanical, clanking sound, like something heavy moving in the dark. Horus spun around, his weapon aimed at the source of the noise, but there was nothing there. For a moment, the squad stood frozen, the air thick with tension. And then, the ground beneath their feet trembled again, this time with a violent force. The altar glowed brighter, its energy surging outward, filling the cathedral with a blinding light. The whispering reached a crescendo, and in that moment, Horus realized the truth. They were not just intruders. They were participants in a ritual, a final reckoning that had been waiting for them all along. The blinding light from the altar seemed to stretch out, swallowing the cathedral in its searing glow. For a brief moment, Horus thought the world around him was being undone, the very fabric of reality tearing apart, as if the planet was refusing to allow them to leave. The walls of the cathedral pulsed with the energy, vibrating with a low hum that resonated deep within his chest, making his heart race. The whispering voices had grown into a deafening roar, drowning out all other sounds. It felt as though the planet itself was speaking to them, warning them, cursing them. And yet, amidst the chaos of the sound, Horus could still hear the low, guttural voice that had spoken earlier, still echoing in his mind, as though it was coming from deep within the earth itself. "You should not have come," the voice repeated, its tone now filled with malice, anger. It was the voice of someone, or something, ancient, far older than anything the Imperium had ever known. It was a voice that had borne witness to the slow death of a world, a voice that had watched as it was consumed by the very darkness they had come to face. The squad instinctively raised their weapons, the fear and uncertainty now replaced by the cold certainty of survival. The cathedral, which had once seemed like a place of forgotten glory, now felt like a tomb that was eager to claim them as its final inhabitants. "Move!" Horus barked, his voice filled with urgency. "We have to get out of here, now." But as they turned to leave, the ground beneath their feet shook again, more violently than before. A roar reverberated through the stone walls, and the very earth seemed to tremble, as if some great beast was stirring deep below. The cathedral's foundations groaned, and the light from the altar flared once more, brighter, blinding them as if trying to push them back. Titus, his face pale with fear, shouted, "Sergeant, we can't leave. We're too close now." Horus spun back toward the altar, his instincts fighting against the cold grip of fear. There was something there, something hidden in the heart of the light that was now consuming the room. He could feel it, a presence, ancient and powerful, pulling at his mind, beckoning him closer, pushing him to understand. But at what cost? As he took a hesitant step forward, the whispering voices seemed to grow louder, and the temperature in the cathedral dropped. His breath came in visible clouds, a stark contrast to the burning heat of the altar's light. The soldiers behind him were tense, shifting nervously, their hands shaking as they gripped their weapons. And then, through the haze of light and shadow, something emerged. A figure, tall and cloaked in darkness, its features obscured by the shifting shadows. It moved with an unnatural grace, its form flickering like a mirage, its presence so overwhelming that it felt as though it had always been there, waiting. "Who are you?" Horus demanded, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to remain calm. The figure did not respond, but the oppressive weight of its gaze was unmistakable. It was the same entity that had spoken to them, the same voice that now filled the very air they breathed. The figure took another step forward, its footfalls like the sound of death itself. Each step seemed to shake the very foundation of the cathedral, each movement bringing them closer to an inevitable conclusion. "I am the last," the figure spoke, its voice echoing across the empty hall. It was not the same voice they had heard before, but a new, deeper one, filled with sorrow and rage. "The last of those who sought to save this world, and now you will be the last to suffer for its sins." Horus stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you want with us?" The figure paused, its head tilting slightly, as though it was studying him, deciding whether or not to answer. The air around them grew colder still, the whispers becoming an almost unbearable cacophony, filling every corner of the cathedral. "I do not want anything," the figure said softly. "It is not I who seeks to destroy you. It is the world. It is the curse that lies within it. You are too late. You cannot escape it." Horus's hand tightened around his weapon. He could feel the truth of the figure's words settling in his gut. They had come too late. This world, this forsaken place, was beyond saving. The darkness that had taken root here had festered for too long. There was no way out, and yet they had to try. "Back to the shuttle," Horus shouted, his voice breaking through the oppressive silence. "We fight our way out. We will survive." The squad turned, retreating as quickly as they could, but the moment they moved, the figure stepped forward again, its form flickering with unnatural speed. It raised its arm, and a cold wind blew through the cathedral, swirling with a terrible force. The walls seemed to warp, and the floor trembled violently beneath their feet. The whispers grew louder, an almost tangible force pushing against them, trying to drag them back. But they could not stop. They had no choice but to fight. Fight and survive, even if it meant facing the wrath of the cursed planet itself. "Get to the shuttle," Horus yelled again, his voice filled with grim determination. "Move, now!" The soldiers ran, their boots pounding against the cold stone, their hearts racing as they fled through the winding corridors of the cathedral, desperate to escape the pull of the darkness. But with each step, they could feel the presence of the figure growing closer, the very air around them heavy with the weight of its malice. It was chasing them, pursuing them with the relentless hunger of a predator. They reached the door of the cathedral, and just as Horus was about to push it open, the ground beneath them gave way. The building groaned in protest, and the ceiling above them cracked, sending shards of stone crashing to the floor. The walls seemed to collapse inward, the cathedral itself seemingly closing in on them, trapping them in its decaying grasp. For a moment, it seemed as though they were going to be buried alive, swallowed by the very structure that had once been a place of worship. But then, a flash of light broke through the rubble. The shuttle. It was still there, hovering just outside the building, its engines roaring as the soldiers scrambled toward it. "Go, go," Horus shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. They ran, pushing past the debris, the wind from the shuttle's engines a welcome relief in the suffocating air. They reached the shuttle just as the figure emerged from the ruins, its shadow stretching long across the broken ground. The whispers reached a fever pitch, the voices now almost deafening. "Get in," Horus barked, and the squad rushed into the shuttle, the doors slamming shut behind them. As the shuttle ascended, the figure remained standing on the ground, watching them. It did not move, did not speak, but its presence lingered, an undeniable weight on their souls. The cathedral below them slowly faded from view, but the whispers remained, echoing in the minds of the soldiers. The curse of the planet was not gone. It had followed them, and it would haunt them until the end of their days. The shuttle clawed at the sky like a wounded beast, a scent thrumming through the deck plates while the world below shrank to a bruise of iron and ash. Inside the troop bay, red lumen strips flickered over faces gray with dust. Malik's chest was cinched in a pressure wrap, stained but holding. Each breath rattled like a loose rivet. Titus steadied him with one gauntleted hand and kept the other near his laser gun's charge pack, as if the planet could still lunge up the ramp and drag them back by the heels. Horus stood braced at the forward bulkhead, helmet clipped to his belt, eyes fixed on a ghosting display where the cogitator struggled to render a clean horizon. For a moment, ascent felt like absolution, a straight line away from something that had no right to live. Then the Vox spat a chain of binharic bursts, too fast for any unaugmented ear, and the cockpit slammed shut, as if the shuttle itself were afraid of what would answer. The cabin lighting guttered. A thin halo of incense smoke coiled from the corner where engine sear adjunct rail had knelt, copper-sutured lips murmuring through a Vox grill as he thumbed a data slate and drummed a counterbeat on a rune screen with mechadendrites that trembled despite themselves. His red robes were blackened at the hem, a stencil of the Imperial Aquila, blistered by heat, peeled on the plating beside him. "Interference," he rasped, voice layered with choir static. "Not atmospheric. Pattern echoes the inscriptions we observed in the sacral hall. Unclean logic, not self-arisen." He did not say demonic. He did not need to. His hands moved in a tight litany of denial, tapping wards into the air. The shuttle lurched as if struck from below. Restraints snapped taut across flak plates. Teeth clicked. Someone swore to saints they'd never met. Through the forward blister, a smear of auroral color bled across the upper atmosphere like oil on water, thin and obscenely beautiful. Horus caught the pilot's glance, wide, white, and felt the old instinct to steady men with lies press against his tongue. He crushed it. "We hold together," he said, toneless, as if reciting inventory. "We ride it out." The Vox croaked again, this time in low Gothic so chewed by static it felt remembered rather than heard. "Do not ascend." The words crawled under the skin. It was a voice with dust in its lungs, too tired to threaten, too stubborn to die. Rail's augmetics clicked like teeth. "Source indeterminate," he said. "Range, close, very close." He lifted the data slate, scrolled, then froze. On the glass, a schematic of the cathedral unfurled in ghost lines. Behind the altar, beneath the nave, a sunburst of sealed access ways and service tunnels flared like a wound diagrammed by a cold hand. "Substructure," he whispered. "Transit spines, Manufactorum era. Someone laid conduits beneath the relic. The inscriptions are control logic, not worship, governance." Then the altar was a switch, Titus said, voice raw. And we flipped it. The shuttle's nose pitched 10 degrees. Alarms bloomed like flowers. A staccato hiss ran through the bay as emergency vents cycled to equalize pressure. Horus banged the bulkhead with a flat palm. "Pilot, status." "Magnetic shear," the reply came, high and fast. "Instruments reading false. Throne, sir. Compass swing. It's like the sky's a magnet and we're a nail." A rattle of teeth on the intercom. A whisper, "Sorry, meant for no one," and heard by all. "Revectoring. I need down. Now." Down meant the planet again. Horus felt the weight of that settle cleanly in his chest, heavier than plate steel. He looked to the men and saw his own thought printed there. They had escaped the cathedral, not the world. He leaned to Rail. "Pick me a place that kills us last." The engine seer obeyed without being told twice. He flicked through grainy auger returns, killed 3 that smelled wrong, and jabbed a rune. "Thermal dead zone, northwest approaches, ash, basins, minimal structure. If the field persists, ground will give us friction to fight it. If it worsens, ground will break our backs. Choice is binary either way." He paused, then added, softly like a prayer with a torn page, "Omnissiah, receive the metal that is thine." They knifed back into the weather. The return burn set a tremor running through the frame that made every rivet sound personal. Through the view blister, the world resolved to a waste of silted craters and glassed ridgelines, a desert like the inside of a dead furnace. Static beat the hull in the rhythm of a giant's heart. The interference faded to a whisper, then a purr, almost pleased. Horus tasted metal on his tongue and knew it for what it was. Promethium smoke baked into atmosphere and never allowed to drift free. Impact was not a singular moment so much as an argument with gravity that the shuttle lost politely, and then all at once. The skids found purchase, lost it, found it again, scooped drifts of ash into plumes that chewed the daylight to ribbons. They slid sideways in a long, screaming hiss and came to rest hard against a dune of compacted cinders. The lights died. For 2 breaths, there was only the tick of cooling metal and the thin keen of a pressure seal, trying to remember how to be true. Horus unclipped and moved before the cabin finished shuddering still. Titus was already on Malik, checking pupils with 2 fingers and a curse. The kid blinked and tried to sit and failed with a groan that ended in a laugh he did not mean. Rail's mechadendrites scribed wards in dust on the deck, a habit so old it had forgotten it was a habit. The pilot spoke through clenched teeth. "Alive, that's the best I can do." "Good enough," Horace said. He palmed the ramp release. It stuttered, protested, and gave a handspan, then a boot's breadth. Cold air slid in with a smell like wet cinders and old engines. Beyond the ramp, the ash basin lay in soft hills, wind-textured and innocent as fresh linen, except that it swallowed sound and reflected nothing. Every step out there would be a sentence. "Sergeant," Rail murmured, not looking up. "Listen." He turned a dial and bled the vox into the open air. At first it was the same sea roar of static. Then a pattern wrote it. Not speech, a cadence. 3 longs, 2 shorts, 1 long. Repeating. It plucked a string in Horace's memory from a training ground half a lifetime ago. "Beacon," he said. "Distress, Mark 5 pattern, pre-Sabatine. No one uses that code anymore." "Someone here does," Titus said. His voice had steadied. He pointed through the opening at the basin's far lip where the ash bank rose like a quiet wave. Along its crest, something stood, spaced at even intervals, the height of a man and the width of a coffin lid. Not statues. Not quite. Pillars of fused slag, capped with stamped plates that caught the flat light and did not shine. Each plate bore a sigil in harsh relief, 2 headed eagles, overlaid by a single cruel letter, carved so deep it had cut the metal's memory. Horace felt the room tighten around that sight as if the inquisitorial brand itself had weight. Rumor traveled faster than ships, and every guardsman learned to walk softly where that letter lay. It promised nothing except necessity. The beacon ticked. 3 longs, 2 shorts, 1 long. The pattern a dead man would choose to count with when he had run out of numbers. Rail cleared his vox grill. "Sergeant, the pillars are power sinks, passive. They drink charge out of the air, a fence, perhaps, or a lid. The code could be automated, but no. There is drift in the rhythm, a living hand." "Then we go," Horace said. He tugged his helmet on and the world narrowed to a seal of glass and breath. 2 ranks, no heroics. If it moves, you tell me before you shoot it. If it prays, you let it finish the sentence. They stepped into the ash, and it took them to the ankle like warm flour. The basin swallowed the sound of their boots so completely that Horace could hear his own pulse. The wind skimmed the surface and lifted small whirls that unwound as quickly as thoughts. Halfway to the crest, Malik hissed and halted, looking down. A hand lay there, inches beneath the skin of the world, articulated silver fingers like a shrine trinket, every joint etched with script so fine it looked like frost. It was not a hand, it was a glove. Around it, the suggestion of a sleeve, a shoulder, a whole shape lying buried, waiting. "Saints?" Titus murmured. "They fell here, and the ash kept them." Horace crouched and brushed one word clean with a knuckle. The letters shone. Not Imperial. Not any script he owned. His tongue felt thick. He stood. Eyes on the crest. They climbed the last of the slope, and the basin fell away behind them. On the far side, beyond the row of inquisitorial pillars, the ground broke into a shelf of vitrified glass that had once been a roadway, and now looked like a black river, held in place by an absent wind. On that glass, a crawler squatted like a flayed beetle, armored, low slung, scarred with rosette seals and warning scripture. Its mast carried 3 aerials and a flag whip of frayed servo cable. A figure stood beside it, hooded in gray, a long staff set in the glass like a planted spear. The staff head was not a blade, not a torch. It was a vox sigil, hand-welded, wired with prayer. The figure raised a hand in greeting that could just as well have been benediction or warning, and the beacon faltered as if the heart behind it skipped. "Pilgrim," Titus breathed. Horus did not answer. He felt the planet gather itself the way a dog gathers to shake off water. Far behind, in the cathedral's direction, thunder stitched the horizon in a pale seam. The hooded figure lowered the hand and lifted the staff, so the vox sigil turned toward them like a face. The beacon's pattern changed. 3 longs, 2 shorts, 1 long. Then a pause that was not part of any code. Then a single, steady tone, held until breath became decision. "Guard?" The figure's voice arrived at last, threadbare but undeniable, carried on the old machine's throat. "You are late." Horus felt something in him answer that without words. He took 1 step forward, and the ash took his weight like an oath. "We came anyway," he said. The hood inclined. "Then listen." The tone clicked off. The wind held still. In the frozen quiet, the planet leaned close. The air had thickened, pressing down like a weight, suffocating in its stillness. The hooded figure remained motionless, a silent sentinel by the crawler, its gaze fixed upon them with an unnerving calm. Every step Horus took toward it felt heavier, as though the earth itself resisted him. Yet there was no turning back now, not when the path had been set, not when the puzzle of this cursed planet had begun to reveal its fractured pieces. The figure's presence, though still, was a disturbance, a kind of crack in the fabric of reality that only the initiated would understand. The figure's voice had been the spark that broke the tension. Its tone was ragged, older than the universe itself. "You came late," it had said. The simple phrase carried an undertone, something unsaid that clung to the edges of the conversation. Horus had heard similar words in his dreams, from soldiers long dead, from places where the Imperium's light had failed to reach. "What does that mean?" Horus demanded, his voice steady despite the disquiet gnawing at his gut. He had seen and heard things in his time, 100 skirmishes with chaos, 1,000 horrors in the underbelly of the Imperium. But this felt different. There was something here, far darker than just a derelict world. The figure remained silent for a moment, its gnarled fingers twisting the staff as though it were a living thing. The staff's sigils flickered, and a static hum pulsed through the air, distorting the already suffocating atmosphere. "Do you know why you are here, guardsman?" The figure's voice rasped again, each word deliberate, slow, like a preacher drawing out a sermon meant for one listener only. Horus's grip on his laser gun tightened as the words stung, not with the venom of a threat, but the weight of truth that he had been avoiding. "To cleanse," he said flatly, though the answer sounded weak even to his own ears. The figure's hood seemed to shift as it looked toward the horizon, its movements deliberate, almost reverent. "You cannot cleanse what was never meant to be," it said, and Horus felt the weight of its words pull at him, dragging him toward a truth he wasn't prepared to accept. The planet was no ordinary place. It had become a graveyard for something older than the Imperium, a tomb that stretched deeper than any human mind could fathom. "What you seek has already been lost." The squad stood still, each soldier feeling the shifting weight of the figure's words, the truth that was being laid out for them. The journey they had started on had been nothing more than an illusion, a desperate attempt to fix what could not be fixed. They had come here expecting to fight against an enemy, fight against the planet, fight for survival. But now, they were fighting against something far more dangerous. They were fighting the inevitable. The figure turned its attention back to Horus, its eyes hidden beneath the dark hood, but its presence all-encompassing, as if it were peeling back every layer of his thoughts, exposing them for all to see. "You think you are the first to be sent here?" it asked, voice soft but chilling. "You think you are the first to come to this world and try to save it?" Horus didn't answer. He knew the figure was right. They weren't the first. In fact, they were merely the latest in a long line of attempts that had all failed before them. "You cannot save a dead world," the figure continued. "You can only delay the inevitable." It lifted its hand, and the staff hummed, shifting, vibrating in tune with the shifting air around them. "This world is not lost to the Imperium. It is lost to time, a place that was never meant to survive, a place that was never meant to be saved. It was forgotten for a reason, and now it will drag you into its depths, just as it has done to the others." The words echoed in the air like the reverberation of a tomb door slamming shut. Horus felt the cold truth seep into his bones. This was no ordinary mission. This was no simple case of reclaiming a lost world. They had stepped into something far more dangerous. And now they were trapped, just as the others had been before them. The soldiers behind Horus shifted uneasily, their faces pale and grim. They knew, deep down, that the figure spoke with an unsettling clarity. The planet was not just a place of desolation. It was a trap, and they were caught in its web. "Then what do we do?" Titus's voice broke the silence, his words almost pleading. He had never faced a foe like this, a world that wasn't just hostile but alive. Alive in ways the Imperium's greatest minds could never have imagined. The figure's response was soft, almost sorrowful. "You fight, of course, but you will not win. No one ever does." The harsh reality of the words hit like a physical blow. Horus clenched his jaw. He had always known there were missions doomed from the start, but he had never truly felt the weight of such failure press down on him until now. "You think we'll give up?" Horus spat, his voice thick with defiance. The impulse to push back against the figure's words was fierce, but he knew that there was truth in them, and truth had always been the enemy of men like him. The figure's hooded head tilted slightly. "No," it said, its voice almost kind now. "I think you will fight. It is all you know how to do." It reached down and traced a symbol on the surface of the glassy ground with its staff, as though drawing something into the dust. "But when you are done, when your war is over, and your blood has soaked into the soil, you will be a part of it, just like the rest." The words fell heavily upon them all, and in that moment, the truth of what this place had become, what it was, began to settle in. The soldiers around Horus felt it too, the crushing weight of knowing they were part of something far greater, far older than they could ever understand. And yet, still, they would press on, they would fight. Horus turned to his men. He saw the fear in their eyes, the dawning realization of what they were truly up against. He could feel it too, the pull of something terrible, something that had been buried here for too long, too many years. They had come to cleanse this world, but now they realized the world itself was the curse. The world was the enemy. "Get ready," he said, his voice low, a final order, even as his own thoughts struggled to reconcile what was happening. "We move out. We're not leaving until we finish this, no matter what." They began to move. Again, the weight of their mission heavier than ever before. The figure did not stop them. Instead, it simply watched, its hooded eyes reflecting a world of ancient knowledge. And as they trudged away, the air behind them thickened once more. The whispers began to rise again, carried on the wind, filling their ears with voices they couldn't understand. But one thing was clear. The world was waiting. The wind, once a whispering undertone, now howled across the barren landscape. As the squad moved forward, their boots crunching against the ash, the feeling of being pursued, of being drawn into something too vast to comprehend, grew stronger. The figure by the crawler had not followed them, but the eerie presence of its warning lingered like an ominous shadow. It was as if the planet itself had turned its gaze upon them, watching with an ancient, hungry patience. Horus led the way, his mind racing through what he had learned. The figure's words weighed on him, and despite the resolve he had forced upon himself, a part of him, deep down, could not deny the truth in them. This world was dead. It was a graveyard for something far beyond the Imperium's reach, and they were now just another set of souls added to its list. But they couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the mission had been laid out before them, when they had come so far. The ground beneath their feet felt hollow, as though it had been hollowed out over centuries. Beneath the ash, they could hear the soft creak of what might have once been structures, buried under layers of time and neglect. There were no signs of life, no birds, no insects, nothing to break the oppressive silence. Even the wind felt like it was whispering of lost promises. "Sergeant," Malik called quietly from behind, his voice strained. "Where are we headed?" Horus glanced back at the squad, his eyes hidden behind his helmet, narrowed with determination. "The heart of this place. If there's anything left, we find it. We finish what we came for." Titus, walking beside Malik, shot a glance at the bleak horizon. "And if there's nothing left but ruin? Then we make sure it stays that way," Horus replied coldly. "We're not leaving this place without answers. We don't know how far the contamination goes. We need to neutralize whatever threat is left here, whether it's the ruins or something more." His voice trailed off as he turned back to the barren landscape ahead of them. The wind seemed to shift, and the ground underfoot trembled, barely perceptible, like the pulse of something deep beneath their feet. Horus paused, his senses on alert. The planet was not finished with them. Not yet. "Stay alert," he muttered. "We're not alone." As the squad pressed on, a low, rumbling sound began to fill the air, growing louder with every step. It was distant at first, like the sound of thunder far off in the horizon, but as they moved forward, the tremors beneath their feet intensified. The earth began to crack, as though some ancient, slumbering force had been awakened. "What is that?" Titus asked, his voice edged with fear. Horus didn't answer at first, his mind racing. He felt it, the unmistakable sensation of something coming alive, stirring beneath them. The pulse of the planet was no longer a distant hum. It was a beat that seemed to echo in their bones. Whatever had been buried here, whatever had caused the curse of this place, was awakening. and they were standing on top of it. The ground gave a sharp crack, and in an instant, the earth beneath their feet splintered, sending a shock wave of dirt and rock into the air. Horus cursed as he leaped back, pulling his men away from the widening fissure. They staggered as the earth cracked open, the chasm yawning wider, as though something was pushing its way through. "What the hell?" Malik gasped, his voice trailing off as the ground split open, revealing a dark, cavernous opening that seemed to lead straight into the bowels of the planet. The rumble continued, growing louder as the ground around them continued to shift. The fissure widened, sending jagged rocks tumbling down into the abyss below. "We need to move, now!" Horus barked, his voice tight with urgency. "Get to the ridge, now!" They scrambled, climbing up the rocky terrain as the ground beneath them threatened to collapse further. Horus glanced behind him, his heart racing as he saw the depths of the chasm opening wider and wider, a dark maw hungry for anything that stood in its path. The wind howled in the distance, but it was no longer the quiet, cold wind of the wasteland. Now it carried a deeper, more resonant sound, a strange, guttural vibration that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. The world around them seemed to be alive with an unnatural force, pushing them forward, urging them to flee. Horus reached the top of the ridge, pulling the others up behind him. As they looked back at the chasm, something in the depths of the earth stirred. Something massive. Something ancient. It was not just the shaking of the ground anymore. The planet itself was coming alive, and they were at its mercy. The squad huddled on the ridge, their backs pressed against the cold, hard stone, eyes scanning the horizon as the rumbling continued to grow louder, nearer. "That thing we saw," Titus said, his voice barely audible. "The one that spoke to us. It wasn't just a warning, it was telling us the truth. This place, it's alive." "It's more than alive," Horus replied, his voice filled with grim realization. "It's awake." Suddenly, a flash of light flared from the depths of the chasm, illuminating the sky for a split second. Then, a sound like a deep, guttural roar reverberated through the earth, shaking the ground so violently that Horus and his men had to steady themselves to avoid falling. The sound was not just physical. It resonated within them, deep in their bones. It was an alien cry, a call that no human mind could ever comprehend. It was the sound of the planet itself, of something that had been buried beneath it for eons, something that had been waiting. "Move!" Horus shouted again, his voice rising above the chaos. "We're not waiting around to see what comes next." They turned and ran, scrambling over the ridge, hearts pounding as the ground beneath them continued to tremble with the force of whatever had been unleashed. They didn't know what it was, but they knew it was not something they could fight. The wind howled behind them, and they pushed forward, each step feeling heavier, as though the planet itself was trying to drag them back into the maw of its abyss. The chasm's rumbling grew louder, its roars mingling with the deep hum of the earth beneath them, and the distant cry that echoed across the land like a reminder of how little control they had over the fate of this world. Horus glanced back, his eyes narrowed in determination. They had come to cleanse the planet. But now, the question was no longer about survival. It was about escape, and there was no guarantee they would make it. The squad surged forward, their boots kicking up clouds of ash and dust as they scrambled across the uneven terrain. The ground beneath them still trembled, and every step felt like it might be their last. Horus's mind raced, each thought battling for dominance. The figure in the cathedral, the warnings it had given, the dark power rising beneath them. But most of all, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being pulled into something much larger than themselves, something that had been waiting for them to arrive. The chasm behind them seemed to breathe. The air was thick with the oppressive weight of whatever had awakened beneath the surface. They could hear it now, the deep groan of the earth, as if the planet was alive, stretching and yawning, pushing against its own shell. The ground shifted again, and the horizon seemed to warp in and out of focus, as if reality itself was flickering, trying to hold itself together in the face of the growing force below. "Faster!" Horus shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of noise. "We need to get to higher ground." Titus, leading the way, glanced over his shoulder, eyes wide with fear. "What is that?" he gasped. "What's coming?" Horus didn't answer. He didn't need to. They all felt it, the undeniable sense of impending doom, a weight pressing down on them that was as real as the ground beneath their feet. Whatever had been buried in the depths of this planet, whatever the planet itself had become, was awakening with a vengeance. And it was hungry. The squad pushed on, their breaths ragged, as the roar from the chasm grew louder. It was no longer a distant sound. It was right behind them, thundering through the earth like the footfalls of some colossal creature. Horus felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise, the instinct to flee fighting against the sense of duty that had always defined him. They reached the top of a ridge, where the ground was solid enough to give them a moment's respite. Horus dropped to one knee, scanning the horizon with his rifle raised, watching for any sign of movement. His heart was pounding in his chest, but his mind remained focused. They weren't done yet. They had to keep moving. They had to survive. "Rail," he said, looking over at the engine seer who had been oddly silent during the flight. "Get the auger readings. What the hell is happening here?" Rail, his mechadendrites clicking in rapid succession, nodded grimly. I'm not sure, Sergeant. The pattern is not natural. The interference is too strong. It's as if the planet is realigning itself. This isn't just a quake. It's a shift, something more." His voice faltered as his eyes scanned the display, eyes wide with fear. "Whatever is in the chasm, it's alive, and it's trying to get out." Horus clenched his fists. Alive. The words repeated in his mind, digging into him with a realization that made his stomach twist. Alive. Not a simple geological event, not a rebellion of nature. This was something else entirely. The sound of the earth groaning under its own weight became a constant, rhythmic thrum beneath their feet. The world around them seemed to pulse with life, the landscape bending and twisting in ways that defied understanding. The very air felt charged with electricity, as if the planet itself was full of static, waiting to discharge. "Everyone, stay alert," Horus said, his voice grim. "We don't know what's coming, but we'll have to face it, together." He turned his attention back to the horizon. The storm clouds that had been gathering overhead were now swirling, their dark mass shifting unnaturally fast, as though being drawn by some invisible force. The sky seemed to darken with each passing second, and the wind picked up, howling in strange patterns that only deepened the sense of unease. "Take cover," Horus shouted as a sharp, biting wind kicked up the ash, making the air sting with its sharpness. It wasn't just dust in the air. There was something more to it now. Something alive that clung to the air, wrapping itself around them, seeping into their skin. The soldiers huddled behind rocks, their laser guns trained on the shifting horizon. Horus's mind raced. Where was it coming from? The creature? The force? The planet itself? Then, through the dust, they saw it. The earth itself began to ripple, like the surface of a pond, disturbed by some unseen force. The ground split open again, this time with terrifying force, sending massive chunks of stone and ash flying into the air. And through the crack in the earth, they saw what had been stirring below. It was a massive shape, dark and colossal, a blur of twisting metal and rotting flesh that seemed to emerge from the depths of the planet itself. Its form was almost indistinguishable, an amalgamation of alien technology and something far worse, something that shouldn't exist, let alone awaken after so long. The creature let out a low, resonant growl that shook the air, sending ripples through the ash around them. It had no eyes, no true shape, just a mass of writhing tendrils, metal arms, and a core that pulsed with a sickly green light. It was a thing of nightmare, an abomination so ancient and powerful that its mere presence threatened to tear apart the very fabric of the world. "Retreat!" Horus shouted. "Get back to the shuttle, now!" The squad didn't need to be told twice. They turned and ran, their heavy boots pounding against the ash as they made their way back down the ridge, back toward the shuttle. The ground beneath them rumbled again, and the massive creature, if it could even be called that, began to rise from the depths. It moved slowly, but its mass was enough to send shockwaves through the air, pushing the soldiers off their feet with each step. Behind them, the creature's voice, if it could even be called that, roared again, shaking the very atmosphere. It wasn't a creature from any known classification of life. It was something older, something that had been lost to time, hidden away beneath the planet's surface, and now it was free. It wasn't chasing them, not yet, but it didn't need to. It was content to let the ground crack and split, to let the very land tear itself apart beneath their feet. The squad ran faster, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion. But the distance between them and the shuttle seemed to stretch further with each step. Horus could feel it too, the weight of the planet, the weight of the creature rising from the depths. It wasn't just alive, it was angry, and they were the ones who had disturbed it. "Faster!" Horus shouted again. "We need to get to the shuttle, or this entire planet's going to take us down with it." They were almost there. The shuttle loomed ahead, its engines roaring, the lights flickering as the pilot fought to keep them steady. Horus could see the ramp descending, the doors wide open. "Move!" he barked. "Get in, now!" They reached the shuttle just as the ground beneath them rumbled again, and with one final push, they dashed up the ramp, slamming into the cabin with the creature's roar echoing in their ears. The ramp slammed shut behind them, and the shuttle shot upward, its engines roaring as it tore through the atmosphere. As they ascended, the view of the planet below them shifted, the cracks in the earth widening, the massive creature still struggling to rise from the depths. The sky above seemed to collapse into a storm, its clouds swirling with unnatural force. The planet was fighting back, and the soldiers inside the shuttle could only watch as the dying world below them tore itself apart. Horus leaned back in his seat, his chest heavy with the realization of what they had just unleashed. There was no going back now. The planet would never be the same. And neither would they. The galaxy was vast, and yet in this moment, the Imperium had encountered a force greater than it had ever known. The horrors of this cursed world were only just beginning. The shuttle ascended into the upper atmosphere, its thrusters roaring against the pull of gravity. The view outside the windows was an apocalyptic one. Beneath them, the cursed world seemed to writhe in its death throes. A once proud planet, now consumed by the wrath of whatever had been awakened. The ground below had cracked open like a festering wound, splitting into jagged chasms that spilled molten rock and ash into the sky. The creature, if it could be called that, still loomed at the heart of the rupture, its massive form stretching impossibly large as it seemed to claw its way toward the surface. The air shimmered with the heat of its rising fury. Horus sat back in his seat, his hands gripping the straps that held him in place. His mind raced, trying to piece together everything they had seen. The figure, the ancient cathedral, the ritual buried beneath the earth. It was all connected. But how? And what had they truly unleashed? Whatever it was, it had shaken the planet to its core, and now the planet was returning the favor. "Sergeant," Rael's voice cut through the turbulence, his tone as measured as ever, though it was laced with something almost akin to fear. "I've tried to scan the atmospheric readouts, but the interference, it's like the planet is rejecting us. I'm detecting massive fluctuations in the electromagnetic field. The planet itself is alive, but it's not just alive. It's actively pushing back against us." Horus's gaze shifted toward the cockpit, where the pilot, pale and grim, was struggling to keep the shuttle on course. "Can we maintain this orbit? Is there any chance we can escape the planet's pull?" The pilot's voice came over the comms, tinged with panic. "We're losing power, Sergeant. The ship's systems are failing faster than we can repair them. If we don't break free soon, we'll be dragged back down. And that thing..." The pilot's voice faltered. "It's too strong. We might not make it." Horus's eyes narrowed. He had seen many things in his years of service to the Imperium. But this was different. This wasn't just another planet to be conquered, another enemy to be defeated. This was something beyond their understanding. Something ancient, something buried for reasons far older than the Imperium itself. "How long do we have?" Horus asked, keeping his voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. "Maybe 10 minutes," the pilot replied, his voice strained. "Then we need to make our move," Horus said, turning to the squad. He stood, moving quickly toward the shuttle's rear hatch. "Get ready for a hard exit. We don't know what we're up against, but we need to break this curse before it breaks us." Titus and Malik, already strapped into their seats, exchanged glances, but neither spoke. They knew what Horus meant. If they were going to make it out of this alive, they would need to take the fight to whatever had been unleashed, no matter the cost. The shuttle began to shake, and the sound of metal groaning under pressure filled the cabin. The planet's magnetic field surged, pulling at them with unnatural force. Through the rear hatch, the swirling chaos of the atmosphere could be seen, a violent storm of ash and lightning. The once crimson sky now churned with unnatural green and purple hues, as if the very color of the planet had been twisted by the forces below. "Sergeant," Rael's voice broke through the tension. "The augurs, they're detecting something. Something big. It's not just the planet. There's something else. Something that's been lying in wait." hidden beneath the surface. Horus's blood ran cold. The implications of Rael's words hit him like a sledgehammer. "How do we stop it?" Horus demanded. Rael hesitated, his mechanical hands working furiously across the data slate. I don't know. The patterns don't match anything in the archives. This, whatever it is, has been hidden from the Imperium. It's not just a warp anomaly. It's something else. Something that's been waiting for us to come. Horus gritted his teeth. There was no time for hesitation. If they were to survive, they would need to confront whatever nightmare lay beneath this cursed world. He turned to his men. "Gather your weapons," he ordered, his voice cold and resolute. "We're going down again. We don't leave until we finish this." The shuttle's descent was violent, as if the planet itself had decided it would not let them go without a fight. The descent path was unstable, with jagged bursts of turbulence that made even the most hardened soldiers clutch their restraints. Horus fought to steady himself, but the thought of returning to the surface, of facing whatever awaited them, gnawed at him. The figure in the cathedral had spoken the truth. They were not the first to come to this place, and they wouldn't be the last. The planet had a memory. It had been scarred by ages of dark forces, and now it was turning its wrath upon them. "Hold on," the pilot shouted, his voice strained as he wrestled with the controls. "We're coming in hot. Brace for impact." The shuttle screamed through the air, its hull groaning under the strain as they made their descent into the heart of the storm. Ash and debris slammed against the sides of the shuttle, buffeting it from all directions. Horus glanced out the window, his eyes narrowing as the massive creature they had seen earlier loomed in the distance, now fully risen from the depths. It was larger than anything they had ever encountered, its form shifting and changing, as though it were a living manifestation of the planet's corruption. It stood at the center of the rift, a massive, writhing mass of organic and mechanical horrors. Tendrils of living metal coiled around its form, pulsating with a sickly green light. The creature's eyes, or what passed for eyes, burned with an unnatural fire, glowing bright with the promise of destruction. The shuttle continued its descent, the world below them now a darkened landscape of shifting chasms and ruined buildings. In the distance, the massive creature let out a low, guttural roar, shaking the very air around them. It was drawing closer, and Horus knew that they had no time left. "Prepare to land," the pilot shouted, the panic in his voice palpable. Horus nodded grimly and turned to the squad. "We fight, and we end this. No one leaves until the curse is broken." They landed with a violent jolt. The shuttle's engines screamed as it skidded across the cracked earth, coming to a halt just a few hundred meters from the massive creature that had emerged from the depths. The ground around them continued to tremble, and the air was thick with the hum of unnatural energy. "Move out!" Horus shouted, unstrapping himself and drawing his laser gun. "Form up, we're going in." The soldiers followed, their faces set with grim determination. As they moved toward the beast, the ground shook again, and the massive form ahead of them began to stir. Tendrils of living metal reached toward the sky, and the air hummed with a resonance that made their teeth rattle. Horus took a deep breath and stepped forward. They had come to face the heart of this cursed world. Whatever they were about to encounter, they would meet it head-on. And if they were to die here, they would die fighting, fighting to cleanse this world of the darkness that had taken root. The creature's eyes glowed brighter, and it let out another deep, resonant roar, shaking the very ground beneath them. "We end this now," Horus muttered under his breath, tightening his grip on his weapon. And then they charged. The air was thick with the stench of decay, the smell of something ancient and rancid. It was as though the very atmosphere was charged with the anger of the planet, every breath an effort to fight back against the overwhelming pressure. The squad moved forward, weapons raised, hearts pounding as the ground trembled beneath their feet. The creature, now fully risen from the depths of the chasm, loomed before them like a nightmare given form, a mass of writhing tendrils and twisted metallic limbs pulsating with sickly green light. It was as though the world itself had become one with it. The ground was no longer solid. It was a shifting mass of corrupted earth, living metal, and rotting flesh. The very air was filled with the hum of warp energy, distorting reality itself. The creature was not just alive. It was the embodiment of the planet's corruption, a physical manifestation of the curse that had taken root here so long ago. Horus led the charge, his laser gun held steady, eyes locked on the beast that towered above them. Every step felt like a defiance against the forces that were conspiring to tear them apart. The men behind him followed without hesitation, their resolve matching his. The creature roared again, its voice a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through their bones, filling their minds with a sense of hopelessness. But they would not falter. They had come this far, and now they would see it through. The ground beneath them cracked, and with a deafening rumble, the creature's tendrils lashed out, striking the earth with the force of a battering ram. The very air seemed to warp around them, distorting their vision and filling their ears with a ringing, high-pitched noise that made their heads ache. "We need to hit it hard," Horus shouted, his voice barely cutting through the cacophony. "Concentrate fire on the core. We take it down now, or we're all dead." The squad responded instantly, their laser guns lighting up the darkness, firing in perfect sync. The beams of light struck the creature's writhing mass, but it barely flinched. The creature was a living nightmare, a mass of organic and mechanical parts fused together in some horrific union. The energy from their weapons seemed to dissipate before it could do any real damage. "Nothing's getting through," Malik shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "It's like it's shielded." "Focus," Horus barked, not taking his eyes off the beast. "We need to get closer. Use the terrain for cover." They advanced cautiously, moving from one fractured piece of the corrupted earth to the next, seeking shelter from the creature's attacks. The ground beneath them shifted violently, and a massive crack split open in front of them, sending debris flying in all directions. The creature's tendrils whipped through the air, crashing down toward them with deadly intent. Horus ducked behind a fallen pillar, feeling the heat of the blast as one of the tendrils struck the ground beside him, sending rocks and ash flying. The impact rattled him to his core, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to be shaken. He couldn't afford to lose his focus. Not now. Not when they were so close. "Keep moving," Horus shouted, motioning for his squad to advance. "We need to get under its guard. It's too powerful from the front." They moved again, taking cover behind more shattered pillars and fallen pieces of metal as the creature's tendrils lashed out in all directions. The air was thick with the sound of metal scraping against metal, the hissing of energy, and the relentless roar of the beast. "Almost there!" Titus shouted from the front, his eyes wide with fear and determination. "We need to—" Before he could finish, one of the creature's tendrils slammed into the ground just in front of them, sending a shock wave through the earth that knocked them all off their feet. The force of the impact rattled their bones, and for a moment, the world seemed to spin out of control. Horus struggled to regain his footing, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The creature had them in its grip now, its tendrils blocking their path forward. They were trapped. "Fall back!" Horus shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. "We can't fight it head on." But even as he spoke, the ground beneath them cracked open once more, revealing an abyssal chasm, a pit that seemed to stretch into infinity. The creature's tendrils surged forward, wrapping around them, pulling them toward the edge of the abyss. "No!" Horus shouted, struggling to break free, but the creature's grip was too strong. Malik was pulled away first, his screams cut short as he was dragged toward the chasm. Titus lunged forward, grabbing hold of his leg, but the creature's tendrils were relentless. Horus watched in horror as his men were torn away, one by one, dragged into the abyss. The creature's laughter, if it could even be called that, echoed in the air, deep and mocking. Horus's heart pounded in his chest, his grip tightening on his weapon as he watched the creature loom closer. He had failed. His squad had failed. They were losing, and there was nothing left to do but fight. With a roar, Horus sprang forward, charging at the creature with everything he had left. The creature's tendrils lashed out, but Horus dodged, diving beneath them as he closed the distance. He could see it now, the creature's core, hidden deep within its mass of writhing flesh and metal. It was there, beating with a sickly green light, the heart of the monster that had emerged from the planet's depths. Horus raised his laser gun, his hands trembling with exhaustion and fear, but he didn't hesitate. He fired, unleashing everything he had into the creature's core. The beam of energy struck the heart of the beast, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a blinding flash of light, the creature let out a screech that was so loud it rattled the air. The ground beneath them cracked open, the earth splitting as the creature's body began to convulse. Horus staggered back, shielding his eyes from the light as the creature's body twisted and writhed, its form breaking apart in a violent explosion of energy. The shock wave threw Horus to the ground, and the world seemed to blur as everything around him was consumed by the blast. The earth shook beneath him, and for a brief moment, he thought the planet itself was coming apart. When the light finally faded, Horus struggled to his feet, his head pounding. He looked around, his breath ragged in his chest. The creature was gone, its massive form reduced to a pile of smoldering, twisted wreckage. But the damage had already been done. The planet was still dying. The air was thick with the scent of burnt ozone and ash, and the ground beneath them was still trembling with the echoes of the beast's destruction. The sky above them was dark, swirling with storm clouds that seemed to churn with the remnants of the creature's energy. Horus stood, his body aching, and looked at what was left of his squad. Titus, Malik, none of them were still standing. They had been taken, dragged into the abyss by the creature's relentless force. And now, Horus was alone. But the battle was not over. The planet was still alive, still fighting. And the curse that had claimed it was far from broken. Horus glanced at the horizon, where the last remnants of the creature's energy still lingered in the air. The storm continued to churn, and in the distance, the silhouette of something far worse than the creature they had just fought could be seen on the horizon. The true enemy was not over yet. The air had become unbearable. Every breath Horus took felt like inhaling 1,000 jagged shards of glass, the thick, choking atmosphere pressing against his chest. The ground beneath his boots seemed to groan, a deep, unsettling sound that vibrated through his entire body. The planet wasn't just dying, it was thrashing, fighting for its survival, as if it were alive and aware of every last breath it took. The sky, once full of promise, had turned to a twisted reflection of the planet below, a swirl of dark, violent clouds, pulsing with unnatural energy. It was like the world itself was preparing for its final, catastrophic act. Horus stood in the midst of the chaos, his body battered and bruised, the remnants of his once proud squad scattered and lost. The creature, the terrible thing that had been awakened, was gone, disintegrated into a twisted mass of wreckage. But that was not enough. The planet was not finished with them yet. The storm continued to rage, and the world seemed to tremble with each passing moment. The ground cracked open again, fissures forming in every direction, releasing bursts of steam and ash into the already thick air. Horus could feel the planet's pulse beneath his feet, a relentless rhythm that seemed to grow louder, more insistent, like a warning or a countdown. A flash of light lit up the horizon, too bright to be natural, too controlled to be an accident. The rumbling of the earth intensified, as though something was being unleashed deep beneath the surface. A force far older, far more terrible than the creature that had been their immediate threat. Horus had thought they had come to the end of the world, but he now understood that they were only at the beginning. The creature had been a servant, a harbinger of something darker, something much more insidious. The figure from the cathedral had warned them. They were late. And now Horus could feel the truth of those words, heavy and suffocating, settling over him like a shroud. They had come to stop something, to cleanse a world that had long been cursed. But in doing so, they had awakened something far worse than they had ever imagined. The storm intensified, and the air seemed to hum with energy, like a tuning fork vibrating in the deepest recesses of space. Horus felt it, a coldness creeping into his very bones, a presence that was far beyond the physical world. It was the sound of 1,000 voices, distant but clear, speaking in a language he could not understand, a language that transcended the limits of human comprehension. In the distance, the silhouette of a massive structure began to emerge from the swirling chaos. A colossal spire, reaching high into the sky, its surface covered in intricate glowing symbols that pulsed with an unnatural light. It was an ancient edifice, older than the Imperium itself, and it had been hidden, buried beneath layers of time and deception. Horus's heart sank as he realized what it was. The spire was not just a relic. It was a gateway, and through it, whatever force had been imprisoned on this world for centuries was now free. The voices in the air grew louder, more insistent, until they were no longer whispers, but a roar that threatened to overwhelm him. The temperature dropped, the air thick with the oppressive weight of something ancient and terrible. The spire was calling to him, calling to all of them. "Sergeant, Rael's voice crackled through the comms, strained, panicked. I can't hold the shuttle much longer. The interference is too strong. We need to get out of here. Horus's mind raced. The shuttle was their only way out, but the spire, the gateway, was pulling them in. The planet wasn't just dying, it was transforming. And they were at the heart of it, trapped between the pull of its death and the dark force that had been awakened. We can't leave yet, Horus said, his voice low, but filled with determination. The spire, it's the source of this curse. If we don't stop it now, we'll never leave. We have no choice, Rael shouted. This place is a death trap. You don't understand, Sergeant. This is bigger than us. The planet itself is an instrument, a weapon. Horus didn't need to hear more. The truth was clear. The planet had been waiting for them. The creature, the figure in the cathedral, the strange energy. It was all part of a plan, a trap designed to lure in the Imperium's best and break them down, piece by piece. And they had played their part, but they still had a chance. They had one shot at redemption. Get to the spire, Horus shouted. It's our only chance. He turned to his men, what was left of them. His squad was battered, barely holding together, but they were still alive. And they would fight, as they always had. The ground shook again, this time with a force so violent that Horus was thrown to the ground. The very air seemed to snap and crackle with energy, and the temperature plunged even further, freezing the breath in his lungs. The spire loomed ahead, an impenetrable fortress of light and shadow, and the path to it was fraught with dangers. We move out now, Horus shouted, scrambling to his feet. No more hesitation. We end this, or we die trying. The squad rallied around him, their faces grim, their weapons ready. They ran, their feet pounding against the cracked earth, as the world around them continued to crack and shake, as though the very planet was tearing itself apart to make way for what lay beyond. As they reached the base of the spire, Horus could feel it, the overwhelming presence of the dark force that was waiting for them. It wasn't just the planet. It was alive. The gateway was its heart, and it had been waiting for the moment when the Imperium would come and stir the ancient curse that had lain dormant for so long. Horus knew that they couldn't defeat it, not directly, but they could stop it. They had to. They reached the foot of the spire, and the air around them thickened, pressing in on them from all sides. The walls of the spire shimmered, their surfaces alive with pulsating light, the symbols glowing brighter as they approached. Rael stepped forward, his mechadendrites twitching with anticipation. I can feel it, the power within this structure. It's not just warp energy, it's real. It's a conduit. Horus turned to the squad. We're going to shut it down, whatever it takes. They moved together, their weapons raised, as the spire's door opened before them with a sound like grinding stone. A burst of cold air surged from within, carrying with it the scent of age-old dust and ancient power. The final battle awaited them. Inside the spire, the true enemy, whatever had been hidden for so long, waited. And it was here, in the heart of the storm, that the fate of the planet and their own lives would be decided. The doors closed behind them. The door to the spire sealed behind them with a soft, resonant hiss, the heavy hum of ancient machinery filling the air. The sudden silence felt suffocating, the weight of centuries pressing down on them. Horus turned to face the interior, the darkness ahead almost palpable, as if the shadows themselves had a will of their own. The walls were smooth, almost perfectly so, save for the glowing symbols etched into the stone, sigils that pulsed with an eerie greenish light. Each symbol seemed to be alive, flickering and shifting, as though they were watching the intruders. "Stay sharp," Horus muttered, his voice low but resolute. "We don't know what's inside, but we're finishing this." The squad tightened their formation, weapons raised, scanning the shadows for any signs of movement. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something older, something that felt too far beyond their comprehension. It was as though they had crossed some threshold, not just into a building, but into a space where the rules of time and reality no longer applied. Rail, his mechadendrites twitching erratically, stepped forward cautiously. "There's something here, some kind of power source deep within. I can feel it vibrating through the air. It's not just the planet. It's like the spire is alive, powered by something far beyond normal engineering." He paused, his eyes widening. "Whatever we're facing, it's not just of the physical world. It's been built, constructed for a purpose." The words echoed in Horus's mind. Constructed for a purpose. That was what it all came down to, wasn't it? They had been lured here, not by some fluke of fate, but because someone, or something, had intended for them to uncover this place. They had triggered the curse, drawn the attention of the dark force that had been waiting. They had no way of knowing what its true purpose was, but Horus knew one thing for certain. It was far bigger than anything the Imperium had ever faced. As they moved deeper into the spire, the air grew colder, and the shadows began to lengthen unnaturally. A faint, high-pitched hum filled the silence, a noise that grated on their nerves. It felt like something was moving just beyond their vision, something that existed in the space between thoughts, flickering at the edge of their perception. Then, ahead of them, the path split. Two doors, side by side, leading into different chambers. The symbols etched into the walls of each passage were different, though the same eerie green glow pulsed from them. "The left," Horus decided after a moment's hesitation, his voice steady. "Move." The squad filed into the chamber, their footsteps muffled against the cold stone floor. The room was vast, its ceiling stretching high above them, lost in shadow. At the far end of the chamber stood a massive altar, an ancient, twisted thing made of blackened metal and stone. The altar was covered in strange, alien symbols, many of which were mirrored from the spire's exterior. But it was not just the altar that drew their attention. It was the figure standing before it. A figure cloaked in darkness, its face obscured by a hood, stood motionless. Its presence was like a weight in the air, pressing down on them, suffocating them with the sheer intensity of its being. The whispers grew louder in Horus's mind, voices churning and mixing with the unnatural hum of the spire, until they all seemed to speak as one. "Do you know why you are here?" the figure asked, its voice deep and echoing, reverberating through the chamber like the tolling of some ancient bell. Horus's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening around his laser gun. "I know why I'm here," he said coldly. "I came to end this curse." The figure did not move, but its presence grew more oppressive. "This is not just a curse, guardsman," it said, its voice dark, almost hungry. "You are standing at the threshold of something far greater, far older. This place was not created to house a weapon, but to imprison a force that was meant to stay forgotten." The words hung in the air like a noose, choking the breath from Horus's lungs. The tension in the room seemed to grow, the air thickening with every second they stood in that chamber. The figure stepped forward, slowly, its movements deliberate, as if it were savoring the moment. "You are too late," the figure continued, its words dripping with a kind of sadistic satisfaction. "The seal has been broken. The force you unleashed," it glanced at Horus, "has already begun its work." Horus's blood ran cold as the figure raised its hands, revealing long, twisted fingers. The air seemed to shimmer around them, and the symbols on the walls began to pulse more violently, the glow intensifying until it was blinding. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the ceiling above them began to crack, as if something was stirring within the very bones of the spire. Rael's voice cut through the tension. "We have to destroy it. If we don't—" But before he could finish, the chamber erupted into chaos. The walls split open, and tendrils of living metal, sharp and jagged, shot from the cracks, lashing out like serpents. Horus and his men barely had time to react as the ground began to collapse, sending the squad stumbling forward, scrambling to avoid the destructive force that was being unleashed. The figure was no longer standing, no longer waiting. It had become a force in itself, a manifestation of the dark power of the spire. Horus barely had time to raise his weapon before the room was filled with a deafening roar. The sound was not one of a living being, but of something else. Something far older than any mortal being, something that had slumbered beneath the surface for millennia. The roar grew louder, and the air around them seemed to crackle with the power of the dark force that had been awakened. "Get out!" Horus shouted, his voice hoarse as he scrambled toward the exit. "Now!" The squad followed him, their weapons firing in unison as they shot at the tendrils that lashed toward them, but it was no use. The creature was everywhere now, its tendrils tearing through the walls and ceiling, filling the chamber with an overwhelming sense of dread. They ran, desperate to escape, but the very walls seemed to close in on them, the structure itself seeming to fight back, to trap them within its cursed heart. And then, at the far end of the chamber, Horus saw it. A single, glowing sigil, the same one that had been etched into the walls of the cathedral. It was the key, the center of the curse. He knew, without a doubt, that destroying it was their only chance of ending the madness. "Cover me!" Horus shouted, his voice filled with determination. He sprinted toward the sigil, his laser gun firing in rapid succession at the tendrils that blocked his path. But the creature was relentless, its form shifting and contorting, almost as if it were trying to prevent him from reaching the sigil. Horus reached it at last, his hands trembling as he placed his palm against the glowing symbol. The moment his skin touched it, a pulse of energy surged through him, a shock of cold that seemed to pierce his very soul. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The roar of the creature, the screams of his men, the tremors of the ground, all faded into the background as the sigil's energy surged through him. And then, with a final, deafening crack, the sigil shattered. The creature howled in fury as the entire spire shook, its form flickering and distorting, as though the planet itself was rejecting it. The walls of the spire began to collapse, the earth shaking with the force of the planet's death rattle. The very air seemed to explode with energy, a final eruption of power that tore through everything. Horus fell to the ground, gasping for breath, his mind reeling from the explosion of energy. But he didn't have time to rest. The planet was dying, and they had to escape before it consumed them all. "Get to the shuttle," Horus shouted, his voice hoarse. "Now!" The squad scrambled, running through the crumbling spire as the ground beneath them continued to shake and crack. The world around them was coming apart, but they had one last chance to escape. They reached the shuttle just as the spire collapsed behind them, the roar of the dying planet filling their ears. The shuttle's engines roared to life, lifting them into the sky as the earth below them disintegrated into a storm of dust and flame. Horus looked back once more, his heart heavy with the weight of what had happened. They had come to cleanse the planet, but instead, they had become a part of its curse. The shuttle surged upward, its engines screaming as it clawed through the atmosphere, struggling to escape the wrath of a dying world. The flames and debris from the collapsing spire flared below them like the final death throes of a once mighty titan. Horus gripped the sides of his seat, his body battered and exhausted, his mind still reeling from the explosion of energy that had nearly torn him apart. He couldn't let himself dwell on it. Not now. Not when there was still a chance to escape. The planet beneath them was burning. Its surface had become a hellscape, a jagged series of ruptures and eruptions that had torn through the once pristine landscape, now nothing more than a smoldering ruin. The massive creature, whatever it had been, was gone, its form disintegrating into the very fabric of the planet itself. But the damage was done. The curse had not just been broken, it had been unleashed in a way that would leave the world scarred forever. "How much time do we have?" Horus asked, his voice tight, his eyes still scanning the horizon. Rael's voice crackled over the comms, distorted by the interference, but it was clear enough to hear. "Not much, Sergeant. The planet's gravitational field is destabilizing. If we don't break free soon, we'll be pulled back down." Horus's heart skipped a beat. Pulled back down. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The planet wasn't just dying. It was dragging everything in its wake, trying to pull them back into its fiery embrace. Whatever had been awakened, whatever had been buried here, was not going to let them escape without taking them with it. "How long until we reach the outer atmosphere?" Horus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. 5 minutes, the pilot answered, his voice strained. "But that's assuming we don't encounter any more resistance from the planet's atmosphere. It's chaotic up here, like the whole world is fighting to keep us from leaving." 5 minutes, Horus repeated, his mind racing. They didn't have time. Not enough time to escape the planet's pull, not enough time to outrun the chaos that was being unleashed. "Focus on getting us out of here," Horus ordered. "We'll hold the line as long as we can." He turned to the squad, his gaze hard and resolute. They had made it this far, fought through impossible odds and faced the unthinkable. But now, with the planet disintegrating around them, the real battle was far from over. Titus, his face pale but determined, looked up from where he was securing his weapon. "What do we do now, Sergeant?" Horus's eyes hardened. "We fight to survive. If we make it out of this, we'll have to report what happened here. We'll have to make sure the Imperium understands the cost of this failure and the price we paid for it." "We won't make it," Rael interjected, his voice filled with a grim realization. "The planet's core, it's collapsing, and with it, Everything in the vicinity will be caught in the gravitational collapse. It will tear apart everything within its reach. If we don't get clear of its pull, there's no chance of survival." The words hit Horus like a physical blow. It was over. The planet had already begun to collapse in on itself. Its heart, the thing that had been corrupted for centuries, finally unraveling. They had come to cleanse it, but instead they had set its final destruction into motion. "Then we'll have to outrun it," Horus said, his voice filled with the kind of cold resolve that had always guided him through battles. "Hold tight and pray we make it." The shuttle shuddered violently as it pushed through the outer layers of the atmosphere, the air around them becoming thick and heavy. The sound of grinding metal and the screech of the hull scraping against the turbulent air echoed throughout the cabin. The planet's grip on them was tightening, the magnetic forces pulling at the shuttle with an overwhelming strength. Every moment they lingered here, the risk grew higher. "Brace for impact," the pilot shouted, his voice panicked. "We've got a breach in the outer hull. There's too much interference from the planet's core. We're going to have to punch through it or we'll be torn apart." "Hold it together," Horus roared. "We've been through worse. Stay with me." The shuttle jerked violently again as another surge of energy from the planet's core rocked it from side to side. Horus's hand instinctively reached for the wall to steady himself, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He could feel the gravity of the situation pressing down on him. Everything was spiraling out of control, and they were still caught in the middle of it. Through the viewport, the planet below them began to fade, shrinking into the distance as they climbed higher. But it wasn't enough. The gravitational field was still pulling at them, dragging them back down, trying to swallow them whole. The roar of the shuttle's engines intensified, their scream cutting through the chaos as the pilot fought to maintain their course. Horus gritted his teeth, pushing against the tide of uncertainty. They were so close. Just a few more moments, and they would be free. And then, with a deafening crash, the shuttle broke through the final layers of the atmosphere. The turbulence began to lessen, the violent shaking slowing as they entered the calm of space. The planet below was now a distant memory, its fiery destruction a fading glow on the horizon. Horus allowed himself a single breath, just one, before he turned back to face the reality of what they had done. The squad was silent, their faces pale, their bodies exhausted. They had survived, but at what cost? Horus sat back in his seat, his chest heavy with the weight of their failure. The mission had been a disaster. They had come to save the planet, to cleanse it of its curse, but instead they had unleashed something far darker than they could have ever imagined. The Imperium would need to know what had happened here, but who would believe them? Who would understand the true horror of the world they had uncovered? The silence in the shuttle was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the engines as they moved farther away from the planet's destruction. The last remnants of the world that had been had already begun to fade from view. "Sergeant," Rael's voice broke the stillness. "What do we do now?" Horus turned to him, his face hardening with resolve. "Now we survive, and we make sure no one forgets what happened here. We might have lost the planet, but the curse, it's not over. There's always more waiting in the shadows." And with that, Horus turned his gaze to the stars ahead of them. knowing that their survival was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. The war they had fought on that world was over, but the war for the future had only just begun.